Okay, so if you've watched my channel for a while, you've probably realised I like to dig around a fair bit. I don't like taking the news networks of the word. They tend to just push out news really quickly because it's more about being first and being accurate. So, I tend to look at a story and I'll go back and do a bit of research and then report on it. So, I was looking at the whole thing about the royal family having a bias towards Meghan and whether that contributed to Archie not getting a title. I covered that in a video over there and totally debunked that. It had nothing to do with any bias towards Meghan being mixed race and Archie being mixed race and that sort of thing. So I thought, hang on a minute, well, what about unconscious bias? So let's look at some evidence of unconscious bias against Meghan. And if there's any studies done, I actually found a study, and I'll get that up. It was done by a website called The Conversation. And what I usually do is I tend to look at the media bias of these websites. And I looked at The Conversation, and it seems to be very factual, little bit left leaning, but not very much. You can see there in that graph. I'll just zoom in a little bit. So it seems to be quite a factual reporting organisation, and very, very high on the factual. I don't see that very often. Very high on the factual. So this is a website called MediaBiasFactCheck.com. I'll leave a link in the description. Very handy for looking at things, and I find that it's pretty accurate. Like news organisations I know, I've plugged them in there and see, and I say, yeah, it's pretty full, pretty spot on. So that's the conversation. So I felt fairly confident that they knew what they were talking about. So the title of the article was, "This is a study, how do Americans really feel about interracial couples?" Let's zoom this a bit as well, so we can read it a bit better. So there's a bit of blurb here, and so according to the most recent US census, approximately 15% of all newlywed couples are interracial. More interracial relationships also appear in the media, TV, film, and advertising. Those trends suggest that great strides have been made in roughly 50 years since the Supreme Court struck down anti-miscegenation. I've never heard that word before. Anti-miscegenation laws. There we go. But as a psychologist who studies racial attitudes, I suspect suspected that attitudes towards interracial couples might not be as positive as they seem. My previous work had provided some evidence of bias against interracial couples, but I wanted to know how widespread the bias really is. So she uses a test called the implicit association test. So what we should do now is we'll explain the difference between explicit and implicit. So when you've got like a explicit bias, it's something that you readily talk about and display, and it's pretty obvious to see. But an implicit bias means that it's implied, it's subconscious. So people sometimes call it a subconscious bias, and that's a lot of the Black Lives Matter and that sort of thing hone in on this unconscious bias against blacks. So they've devised a test. This is through Harvard University. So there's a bit of a blurb here. This is a test that they used in the study. People don't always say what's on their minds. One reason is they're unwilling. For example, someone might report smoking a pack of cigarettes per day. Well, actually, they got it wrong. Somebody might not report smoking a pack of cigarettes per day because they are embarrassed to admit that they smoke too. So, hang on, that doesn't make sense. For example, somebody might report smoking a pack because... No, I think they got it totally wrong. They might report they only smoke two. Another reason is they're unable. A smoker might truly believe that she smokes a pack a day, or smokes 2 packs, or smokes a pack a day, or might not keep track at all, etc., etc. An implicit association test, the IAT measures attitudes and beliefs that people may be unwilling or unable to report. The IAT may be especially interesting if it shows that you have an implicit attitude that you did not know about. For example, you may believe that women and men should be equally associated with science, but your automatic associations could show that you, like many others, associate men with science more than associate women with science. We hope you have been able to take something value from this experience of taking one or more of these tests. So this is like obviously participants get this blurb. So there we go. So what was the results? So they're basically, I'll explain the test what they did. So here we go. So we assessed implicit biases using something called the implicit association test, which I just showed you, which requires participants to quickly categorize same race and interracial couples with positive words like happiness and love and negative words like pain and war. If it takes participants longer to categorize interracial couples with positive words, it's evidence that they likely possess implicit biases against interracial couples. In total, we recruited approximately 1,200 white people, over 250 black people, and over 250 multiracial people to report their attitudes. We found that overall, white and black participants from across the US showed statistically significant biases against interracial couples on both the implicit measure and the explicit measure. So implicit is the unconscious, explicit is the conscious. In contrast, participants who were identified as multiracial showed no evidence of bias against interracial couples on either measure. So this is very interesting because there's always the assumption that only white people have implicit biases against interracial couples. And the more interesting part is that it shows that black people have more of a bias than white people, which is quite surprising. It even surprised myself. So the figure below shows the results from the implicit association test. The lines indicate the average discrepancy in length of time it took participants to associate interracial couples with positive words when compared to associating same-race couples with positive words. Notice that for multiracial participants, the average discrepancy overlaps with 0, which indicates a lack of bias. So this is there we go. Seemed in quite easy. Next is a figure detailing the results from the explicit bias test, with lines measuring average levels of explicit bias against interracial couples. Positive values indicate bias against interracial couples, while negative values indicate bias in favour of interracial couples. Note that multiracial participants actually show a bias in favour of interracial couples, so they're below the line. So the more above the line you are, the more likely you have to have a positive attitude towards interracial couples. So on the left here, you got the whites. They're sort of, below the line, biased against. So, here we go. Let's go back here. So this is the explicit bias against interracial couples. So the more positive it's against, all right? So the more above the line, the more you are against interracial couples. So you see there, the predominantly white had a slightish bias there, so 0.1. Oh dear, my African American audience is going to like this. So blacks had a more negative bias against interracial couples, and the multiracials had a actual negative bias against, which means that they had a positive bias towards interracial couples, if that makes sense. Although we cannot know for sure from our data, we believe that the lack of bias observed among multiracial participants may stem from the fact that they are the product of an interracial relationship. Then there's the reality of their own romantic relationships. Multiracial people have few romantic options that would not constitute an interracial relationship. Over 87% of multiracial participants in our sample reported having dated interracially, which that's interesting as well. So then they went on and said, predicting bias, we also wanted to know what might predict bias against interracial couples. We anticipated that those who had previously been in an interracial romantic relationship or were currently involved in one would hold more positive attitudes. So for both the white and black participants, this is precisely what we found. There was one catch. Black participants who had previously been in an interracial relationship were just as likely to harbour explicit biases as those who hadn't been in one. So maybe they were just dabbling. Let's try to use wait people out, and they just didn't have a positive outcome. So they don't like interracial relationships now. Next, we wanted to test whether having close contact, in other words, spending quality time with interracial couples, was associated with positive attitudes towards interracial couples. That makes sense. The psychological evidence has shown that contact with members of other groups tends to reduce intergroup biases. To get at this, we asked participants questions about how many interracial couples they knew and how much time they spent with them. We found that across all three racial groups, more interpersonal contact with interracial couples meant more positive implicit and explicit attitudes towards interracial couples. So that's interesting too. Finally, but that's expected. I expect that. Finally, we examine whether just being exposed to interracial couples, such as seeing them around in your community, but not engaging with them, just seeing them around, would be associated with more positive attitudes towards interracial couples. Some have argued that exposure to interracial and other mixed status couples can serve as a catalyst to reduce biases. Our results, however, show no evidence of this. In general, participants who reported more bias to interracial couples in their local community reported no less bias than those who reported very little exposure to interracial couples. That I find interesting. So even seeing them in your community on TV and that sort of thing doesn't change the bias. You actually have to be embedded is a good word. Embedded with interracial couples to counteract the bias. In fact, among multiracial participants, those who reported more exposure to interracial couples in their local community actually reported more explicit bias against interracial couples than those with less exposure. That's interesting. So the outlook for the future, according to polling data, only a small percentage of people in the US, 9%, said that the rise in interracial marriage is a bad thing, which means that 91% think it's a good thing. But the bias, of course, the bias isn't saying this, is it? Yet our finding indicates that most in the US harbour both implicit and explicit biases against interracial couples. These biases were quite robust, showing up among those who had close personal contact with interracial couples, and even some who had once been involved in interracial romantic relationships. And that, as they point out, that bias was more prominent in the blacks that participated in this study, which I found quite shocking, really. The only ones that did not show biases against interracial couples were multiracial people. Hang on, multiracial people. So not couples, multiracial people. But I didn't think they had multiracial people. They had predominantly black and predominantly white and people in the relationships. Let's go back and have a look. Oh no, this is multiracial people. Oh, okay. Multiracial participants. Oh, okay. So somebody like Meghan Markle, who's is multiracial, would have the least bias against interracial couples. Okay. I misread that. I thought it was they're actually surveying people that are in interracial relationships. So it's multiracial. Okay. So that's where are we? Right down to the end. Nonetheless, in 2015, 14% of all babies born nationwide were mixed race or mixed ethnicity, nearly triple the rate in 1980. In Hawaii, the rate is 44%. So despite the persistence of bias against interracial couples, the number of multiracial people in the US will only continue to grow, which bodes well for interracial couples. Yeah, because they're saying the more multiracial you are, the less bias you got towards interracial couples. So, and actually, I had a this is quite funny. I actually had a look at famous interracial couples because I was sort of thinking, and a few came to mind. It's like A.J. Simpson. I didn't even with it. Tiger Woods. He sort of mixed race in a multiracial couple, interracial couple. But the surprising one was, and you're not going to believe this, Donald Trump. Donald Trump apparently had a relationship with a black woman for 2 years. I just didn't know that. So it's very interesting, isn't it? So according to this study, he'd be less biased against interracial couples, which is quite interesting because Meghan's basically said that he's racist and blah blah blah. So yeah, Eddie Murphy's in an interracial relationship. I knew Robert De Niro was. They didn't show Tiger Woods here. It's probably not a comprehensive list. I just put famous black celebrities with white partners, basically, just to see a list of them. They're just putting celebrities now. That's Google. What are you doing to me, man? You're not even putting they got Meghan and Harry there, of course. But anyway, I digress. I think they put Chrissy Teigen and John Legend as well. So they just clearly haven't given me the results that I asked for. All right. So very, very interesting study. So according to the evidence, it's probably most likely that the royal family probably don't have a bias against interracial relationships. But of course that's in a different country, so you've got cultural differences as well. But in America, it's showing that that they do exist, and it's less if you're multiracial, and it's actually more if you're black, which is quite surprising. So you're more biased if you're black to be against interracial couples. And yeah, so that sort of makes sense, because I was sort of thinking, especially I've got a fair few African American women on my channel who watch, and I sort of thought, if they'd broken up with their ex-boyfriend or ex-husband, and they saw the ex-husband with a white girl, I'm telling you, there'd be some bias there. You'd be smirking now, wouldn't you? You'd be telling your girlfriend, man, look what I saw. I saw, Tiger. I saw a tiger with a white woman. Damn it. What's she got to do done? Come on, let's be honest. That's what would happen in the real world. And I think this study sort of bears that out too. So they didn't break it down by sex, so I sort of thought that was a bit interesting. I would have liked a little bit more of a breakdown by gender and age and that sort of thing, but they sort of swept over that. I wonder if there's more. Let's go back to it. I don't think they've actually got a link to more of the study. Is there anything down the bottom here? Zoom out a bit. Don't think there's more to the study here. There might be links within the actual article here, so I'll leave the link in the description. Have a look. There might be a more comprehensive. They've got the previous work there. That's interesting. They got the previous work, and also collaborator and I recruited. Here we go, to examine. So if I click on this examine, that might come up as well. More. Here we go. So this could be it, but you probably got to pay for it. Access options, etc., etc. Damn it. Yeah, they usually do this. There's usually a pay gate to these studies a lot of times. But just click around in the article. It's quite interesting. Tell me what you think in the comments below. I sort of like to do these sort of things. So it's sort of almost like Walrus Rider News, when news meets science. You have a bit of a dig, look at what the real evidence is. There's usually, psychology is a huge field. There's usually studies done on these things, and there's usually a study you can pull up and have a read, and make an informed decision. Look yourself. Look at the evidence. Look at all the evidence, and then check out the biases of the people that are doing the studies and that sort of thing. And you really got to do a lot of research to really nut down on these things. And just come to Walrus Rider's channel and have a look what I found. So anyway, on that note, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.